Hello and welcome. I need to start by apologizing. Some of the older footage will be in portrait mode. Not much I can do about that. But this video is all about finishing, lots of tips and tricks to get the most out of your spraying. Let's get going. One thing I like to do when I'm spraying, whether I'm using latex, lacquer, conversion varnish, whatever, if I'm going to be thinning that material, which I almost always do, I add a little bit of whatever thinning material it would be. In this case, I'm using lacquer, so I've got a little bit of lacquer thinner in there. I put just a little bit in there, I swish it around, and you can actually even pull the trigger, let a little bit out. And what that does is that gets all the components that will be in contact with the finish, gets them wet, and then cleanup will be a lot easier. So there's a phenomenon known as surface tension. It's that weird thing that happens when you fill a glass all the way to the top up to the rim and it actually comes up over, but the water doesn't spill over. That phenomenon that keeps that water from spilling over is called surface tension. Well, the same thing happens with finish. That'll keep the paint, or in this case lacquer, from adhering to all those surfaces. Just makes cleanup a breeze. I like a 45-degree angle here. You can see how that's very ergonomic, and the hose will come straight back even if I add a valve or whatever. And you can see how that is much more ergonomic. Fantastic, yeah? This DeVilbiss gun had a really strange thread. It wasn't National Pipe thread. And a buddy of mine, Zach Rouse, he runs this fitting company, and we found something that was close and then silver soldered it in place. I spray a lot, and oftentimes I'll just spray outside. But if it's too hot or the weather's not right, I'll spray indoors, and I just set up a series of 4x8 sheets of cardboard, put a fan in the door with a filter, and I can spray away. So right behind me, I have a door that's propped open. The volume equals about the size of the fan, right? And this creates a beautiful Venturi effect. So I get a nice draft, and all that volume of overspray gets right into that filter, and the air goes out the door. Now, of course, this isn't an explosion-proof environment with outlets and all that. I get it. But the amount of overspray literally just stays nice and low below those 4x8 sheets, and it all exits. Of course, if you have a pilot light, like a water heater, you need to make sure you address that prior to spraying. So these types of gravity feed cup guns are pretty popular, right? And sometimes they will come with a bracket that you would anchor to the wall. But I've noticed that they're very universal, I guess, but they don't always fit right, and sometimes you have to block them out. I'm not a big fan of those. So decades ago, I made this dude, and with that, it just makes it easy to pour in the contents, and you could even store it right there. And occasionally, I just need to spray one little small part, and I'll spray outside. That way I don't have to go through all the, setting up of fans and filters. And so I made this dude. Boom. Yeah. Borderline silly, but very effective. At this point, I've already shot the inside with a seal coat. All right, let's lay down some lacquer. So here, I'm going to adjust the fan horns on the front. You can see how they go vertically, which means the fan will be spraying horizontally. Does that make sense? So here we go. And you can see that, yes, some overspray is going to be going on the inside, but this is just a seal coat, so it all gets sanded later. At this point, it won't matter. And you may not have noticed, but right there at the end, I rotated the horns on the front of the gun. So now I have a vertical spray pattern. And this works well too. I can just kind of tilt the gun slightly. If you're new to spraying, I suggest attempting to use both hands. I'm left-handed, but quite ambidextrous. It's very helpful. And you'll notice I'm twisting my wrist slightly at the very end of each pass, and that will ensure that I get lacquer on the little edge of each one of those vertical stiles. So here's a quick little tip that you can do when you're spraying narrow areas like edges. I just tilt the gun about a 45-degree angle. This literally transfers that fan to a narrower area so I get less overspray and actually apply more material. Sure, I could adjust the fan to a narrower spray pattern, but this just makes it simple and quick, effective. Here I'm going to turn the volume up so you can hear what's going on as I spray. So you may have noticed that the air is constantly flowing, and I just manipulate half trigger when I'm wanting to spray. This technique of using the half trigger provides not only better control, but quicker reaction time. Here's a good example of both those techniques. I'm rolling my wrist so I get spray on the inside edge of those rails, and I'm using half trigger for better control. And always double up or triple up on your end grain. All right, so my process is I will do the first coat is really light. I don't flood the doors or anything very heavy at all. It just goes on kind of a mist coat. This allows the subsequent coats to adhere better. And so I'll basically do two coats that are seal coats, right? And I'm just using the same product. There's not a separate sealer for this particular finish. So I'll do 2 seal coats, then I will sand with 220 grit and maroon 5 maroon Scotch Brite, and then apply a final top coat. So 3 coats total. Get in the sun here. You can see a little bit of a area that I missed on the back of the drawer front, but it won't be shown. It won't be seen because of the drawer box. So the design of this handle, so this drawer front's upside down. So the design of the handle makes it a little tricky to get finish back in here. So by turning them vertical like this, and I can get the gun to shoot a spray pattern right in here, which will get this edge and it'll get down in here. Here I'm hitting the end grain of the handles, which is a little bit porous, right? So just needs a little bit more. You may be rolling your eyes or laughing at this point. Yes, I'm spraying on a ladder. Since lacquer is not very water resistant, the lacquer doesn't stick to it. And since I store the ladder outside, every time I go to use it, it's pretty fresh and ready to go. And no, it's not going to scratch the doors. The only way it can scratch if I slide them. So I don't slide them. If it's something really important, I put some triangular sticks that go all the way across the ladder. You may have noticed when I'm spraying these panels, since there's an edge here that I need to get finish on, as I'm approaching this end, I turn my gun so the spray will get finish on that inside edge. And then here I twist and do that edge as well. All right, here we are after 2 seal coats. You can see the finish looks a little heavier, right? This will get sanded and then one final top coat. All right, hopefully this shows up. I've intentionally, I don't have enough thinner in this. So I wanted to show you what it will look like. It will be kind of grainy, a little bit pebbly. So in other words, it's not able to atomize the material correctly. And there's a lot of factors, a lot of trade-offs, a lot of compromises when it comes to spraying. You're going to have the thickness or the viscosity of your material, your air pressure, your pattern width. They're all related. The wider the pattern, the more air it's going to require, right? The narrower pattern will require less air. So there's really not one setting for the entire project. Typically, I'm always adjusting air pressure, pattern width, etc. See how that's real pebbly? I don't know if that shows up or not. It's pebbly. It's not coming out consistent. I can turn up the air pressure to fix some of that problem. And that's a little bit better, but now the trade-off is that I have more pressure, it's atomizing better, it's coming out and laying down better, but I have more overspray if I'm dealing with corners, inside drawer boxes, etc. You want the lowest amount of air pressure, typically. You want the lowest amount of air pressure and still be able to push that material out, if that makes sense. So I'm going to thin this a little bit, and then we'll spray that again. All right, so I'm thin, and I really don't know the ratio. I just go by, let that car go by. I go by feel and by eye. On lacquer, I know that I'm about 25% thinning, maybe a little bit more on the last coat so it flows better, but right around the 25% range, 25% thinner. So like a 3-to-1 ratio. 3 parts lacquer, 1 part lacquer thinner. In this case, I'm probably really close to that as well. So I'm gonna turn this around, and you'll see how this flows a lot better being thinned properly. I don't know if this is really not the right material to show you this process because it's pretty striated and quite porous, but we'll keep building this, and this will be more clear as it gets a better build, and then you can see the difference between thinned properly and not thinned enough. If it's too thin, well then on vertical surfaces, it's going to run real easy. So like I said, trade-offs, compromises, that's what it's all about. So this is sterrated sandpaper. It's 220 grit. I take 2 sheets, they're 8.5 by 11 or whatever they are size-wise, and I use like a spray adhesive, stick them back to back, right? Use a roller to mash them down, make sure they're nice and tight. That way, when I'm using them, I don't have a smooth side of sandpaper that's slipping. I don't have to fold it and all that jazz. You can just grab that. It just sticks to your fingers, right? Very effective. Of course, the goal here is we're just sanding the finish. We're not sanding the wood at all, right? And I want to see if I can show you this. So if I put my fingers on here and I sand this, see that? So you need to be aware of that and make sure that you're sanding, you're keeping the paper nice and flat and you're not putting pressure points from your fingers, or you can put some of this Scotch-Brite on there. That evens everything out. This stage is not critical if you sand across the grain. It shouldn't matter. Although you should try to go with the grain, just because if you have a higher gloss, those scratches could show up with a low raking light. So it just makes sense to stay with the grain. Some of these areas would be hard to get to with sandpaper without burning through this corner. I mean, you could if you're careful. But what makes more sense is to use some of this Scotch-Brite. It'll conform to the areas you need to sand without putting too much pressure on these vulnerable, sharp corners. Well, they're not really sharp, but these have been eased with sandpaper when it was raw wood, but still it's easy to cut through the finish with sandpaper. One advantage of being outside is that I can easily see any droplets of glue that have hardened and squeeze out basically. And I can just remove that easily with a chisel. And again, using the combination of the 220 grit sandpaper and the maroon Scotch-Brite, I can easily sand all the surface areas, the flat, the profile, corners, without having to worry about burning through anywhere. 320 grit would be another option, but 220 works a little bit faster, and for the shop grade cabinet, this is perfect. If you have a detail like this where you have grain going this way and going the other way, well, of course, you can just sand this direction first. Something like, yeah, camera's in the way. Let me get around here. I'm just coming right up to it, maybe going over this vertical just a bit, and then I can hit this like that, then blend it all with the Scotch-Brite. The Scotch-Brite will leave a lot finer scratches or no scratches, so that's why I use it to blend last. Of course, this little round over and detail here, hard to sand with sandpaper. Scotch-Brite works well. And yeah, I suppose, you know, spraying on the ladder is not ideal. If it's a high-end project, I end up using some sticks that are kind of triangular shaped so that minimal contact on those spraying cowls, whatever you want to call them. But, you know, as long as you're not sliding it or banging it around, shouldn't have any problems. Of course, this is the back. It's going to get covered primarily or mostly by the drawer box, I should say. But still sand it. You may even be thinking that I'm not sanding enough, but it really doesn't take much at all. We're getting the finish smooth. The wood has already been sanded smooth. That is very smooth. In here, really no reason to sand that. Doesn't take much sanding at all. It's a very light touch. This is one of those situations where less is better. Back in here, I just kind of roll this up. Oops. And cram that in there. And that'll conform to that area really well. I don't use one or the other. I use them both. They both have their place. They're very effective. In another part of the video, I'll show you what I do with these small pinholes. These are little 23 gauge pins that I use to attach this handle, and we can make those completely disappear. That feels awesome, really smooth. This bottom edge. The ends. And that is it. That is ready for top coat, or the final coat, I should say. All right, after a quick blast of air, we're ready for the final coat. And I like to start it on the inside on a cabinet, right? If there's any overspray, it'll get on the inside. So we don't want to start on the outside first. Let's do the inside first. Just laying down a nice medium coat. Vertical surfaces can run easily, so you have to watch that. My fan is fairly wide. And watch as I approach the corners. I'm stopping right at the corner. And I can do that by whipping my wrist and making that change. Or I can come up slightly. Notice how I come up the side? This will eliminate heavy areas that get double coated. This will make more sense when I do the other side. So here I'm coming down. I'm going sideways instead of up and down. And I know that down here near the bottom, it's already been coated. So I can just quickly go across that. Spraying the inside edge. What's important is that you can see the reflection and you can see how much build you're putting, right? So I took a glance there. That's how it's done. So to spray the final top coat on the outside, I'm going to put this cardboard on top, right? And that'll minimize any overspray getting on the inside. And me scusi, I'm kind of in the way here, blocking the shot, but you can see I'm using a shield, and also just to mitigate or lessen the chance of overspray getting on the inside, right? And here I should have used a shield, but I do a horizontal stripe right underneath that drawer opening, and then I can rotate my tip. The fan is now horizontal, and I can just come up right to that opening. And you'll see as my gun is traveling, I let go of the trigger, or start the trigger right as I go past that opening. And here I must have noticed that could use a little bit more, so yeah, let's get some more overspray on the inside. And just give it a final coat with a wider spray pattern just to even things out. Here was an area that was a little bit maybe heavy, and to prevent that from running, I just blast it with air. That'll cause that lacquer to flash off, prevent it from running. Nothing much to see here, same process on the back. I'm doing the areas that are a little bit harder to get to start, including that inside edge. Then I can just spray horizontally. It doesn't really matter that I'm not going with the grain. The finish is, there is no direction with it. When sprayed correctly, it's just one uniform coating, so it doesn't really matter that you're not going with the grain. I think that's a really big misconception from talking to other woodworkers that use spray type finishes. It's probably commonly known when spraying doors and drawer fronts, we want to spray the backs first, right? In case something sticks, at least it's on the back side. So what I like doing is I like to lay them all out, front side up. I blow that off, flip them over, blow off the back, and I'm ready to shoot. Well, normally I do that. Here, I'm going to do something different. All right, at this point, the cabinet, I've taken it out of here, and you notice I only have one drawer front. I'll do one at a time because I don't want to get any overspray on the surrounding pieces. If I was spraying inside, and sometimes I'll do that, I can set up this area where I have a fan with a filter, and I can spray inside, and I'll use a little turntable where I can spray one component at a time, and that works really well. Outside, I don't worry about the turntable because I can just walk around the piece pretty easily. In other words, I don't have to worry about the direction of the overspray. I don't have to aim it toward the fan. Again, I'm angling the entire gun to shoot the edges, so I don't have to adjust the fan width. And doors and drawer fronts, anything that you can lay flat are super easy because you can lay down the material, heavier with one coat. Even though I only do 3 main coats, I count the 2 first ones as strictly seal coats, and then the main top coat, I may do 1 or 2 coats depending on if it's horizontal or vertical. If it's vertical, I'll do a light coat and then go over it again. So I count that as 1 coat, but I let it flash slightly between. Hope that makes sense. Okay, let me show you this with the sun shining. If I can get the angle right here. Kind of hard to do on camera, but there you go. So you can see complete coverage, right? So the trick when you're spraying, it doesn't matter if it's latex, lacquer, polyurethane, whatever. You want to keep the finish wet as you spray. If any one part gets dry, you're going to have like a rough surface. So keeping it wet is really important. You can already see this area right here is already starting to dry. Some of these finishes tack up really quick, especially if the sun's shining and it's warm out, which it is. Even though it's February, it's pretty warm today. And here I'll just continue doing one at a time to reduce or eliminate overspray, right? And this isn't exactly a high-end job. It's a shop cabinet, but I still want it to look decent. And lacquer is a really good way to do it. Typically, I use conversion varnish. In general, conversion varnish is going to be a more durable finish. So in general, or usually I should say, I can mix up just about the right amount, just from years of experience. But anyway, I wanted to show you this. If the finish isn't thinned correctly, if it's not thin enough, rather, it will have a stippled look, kind of pebbly, kind of textured, and the material just isn't flowing right. If it's too much, that's another problem, but it's probably better to be too thin than not thinned enough. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're shooting a vertical surface, the too thin will be a problem. If it's laying flat, well, you should be fine, but it's important to get it right, and it just takes experience to know where that is. So let's go ahead and spray this and see if this, you'll see how this lays down. Let's spray it this way. You see how I'm overlapping? It's a full-on wet all the way across. So if you've been spraying for a while, hours I should say, and the spray pattern's not looking or feeling quite correct, it could be a simple thing to fix, to just create some back pressure. And so this is an old airbrush technique where you just cover the nozzle with a rag or shop towel, whatever, and pull the trigger. Turn up the volume, or the air I should say, and you can hear it, feel it bubbling inside. It's called back flushing, and it'll clean those little orifices and passages, and then spray correctly. All right, here we go. You may have seen this already. This is the finished project. I needed a Panther router cart for my Panther router, right? Plenty of storage. Put some deep drawers at the bottom, but wait, there's more. I added this little dude, full extension 30-inch deep drawer, right? And with that, I made this folding platform, folding countertop, I guess, which will create a platform. Yeah, man, this is awesome. So this will be level with the primary countertop, right? It just folds like that. I'll have storage in that drawer, of course. So this secondary countertop will serve two functions. A, well, more countertop space, right? For bits and fall off pieces, this and that. And B, it'll give me a place to put this added platform or support, right? And now I can cut the ends of these longer components. I love it. That's going to do it for this video. Make sure to come back for part 2. In that video, I'm going to talk about tips and tricks and always so much more. Do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button. Thanks a ton.